to do a little canoeing on Lake Laurentian with some local kids. Anytime I get out for a paddle, I'm reminded of just how beautiful Canada is. I say it all the time, but we really do live in the best country in the world. Nature, from our gorgeous lakes to our towering mountains, is a huge part of Canadian identity. It makes us who we are. Canadians get the importance of preserving our environment for our kids and grandkids. Too many conservative politicians don't. Here in Ontario, you've seen firsthand what happens when the Conservatives give up on the environment. Doug Ford fired Ontario's chief scientist. He got rid of Ontario's cap and trade program, which funded energy efficiency initiatives for homeowners, renters, and businesses. He cut funding for flood management programs by 50%, and he canceled a program to plant 50 million trees, forcing our Liberal government to step in to save it. Well, we shouldn't be surprised, because that's just what Conservative politicians do. They cut taxes for the wealthy and the big polluters and cut services for everybody else. And now Andrew Scheer, who's vowed that his first act as Prime Minister would be to make pollution free again, wants you to double down on Conservative politicians. Twice the tax breaks for big polluters and the wealthy, and twice the cuts for you and your family. While Doug Ford focuses on a buck a beer, there are grade 12 students that might not graduate this year because there aren't enough teachers to offer courses they need. Doug Ford cut Ontario's pharmacare program, a program that was focused on helping our most vulnerable kids and young adults. Think about that for a second. Cuts to the environment, to education, to health care. Ontario can't afford to double down on the Conservatives. Liberals are for moving forward, for you and for your family. And that includes protecting our environment and fighting climate change. When we were elected in 2015, about 1% of Canada's oceans and coastlines were protected. Now, just 4 years later, that number is at almost 14%. Our government invested $1.35 billion to protect Canada's land and freshwater, the largest nature conservation investment in our history. In the last 4 years, we've conserved land equal to 3.5 times the size of Nova Scotia and created the largest national urban park in North America. We've also worked in close partnership with Indigenous peoples in our conservation efforts, including the Decho in the Northwest Territories. But
in spite of the progress we've made in protecting and preserving our environment, we know that we have to do more for our generation and for the next. That's why I'm pleased to announce today that a Liberal government, if re-elected, will work with the various levels of government and landowners, business people and the Indigenous people to conserve 25% of our land and 25% of our oceans by 2025. By 2030, it will be 30% of our land and 30% of our oceans. Throughout the process, we have been there to allow ourselves to be guided by the knowledge of the Indigenous peoples, who are the guardians of our land and have been for millennia.
Our environment, we also want to ensure that young people, newcomers and families who might not often get out to explore our parks get opportunities to appreciate and enjoy the very best of what Canada has to offer. Now, the people in this beautiful part of the country know firsthand how great it is to spend your weekends camping. The joy of roasting marshmallows with the kids or jumping into the lake on a hot summer day, you just can't beat it. But not all Canadians are so lucky, and we want to change that. That's why a re-elected Liberal government will expand the Learn to Camp program so that by the time they reach grade 8, all Canadian kids will have had the opportunity to experience camping and learn important outdoor skills. We'll also create a national Experience Canada program so that each year 75,000 kids who qualify will get to enjoy up to a 4-day adventure with their families in one of Canada's national or provincial parks. Because we have listened to the courageous voices of our youth who are demanding that their governments take bold action to protect our nature for future generations. And we know that we raise environmental champions by helping the next generation experience Canada's natural beauty firsthand. My friends, a new Liberal government will continue down the path of conservation and environmental protection, because we know the best way to serve Canadians is to make life more affordable today and plan ambitiously for tomorrow. Our team will increase access to before and after school care. We'll make sure every Canadian has access to a family doctor, to mental health services, and to national pharmacare. We'll ensure that all Canadians can take paid family leave when they have a baby. We'll cut taxes for the middle class and those working hard to join it, unlike the Conservatives, who will cut taxes for the wealthiest few.
We will reduce cell phone bills by 25%, and we will help you to buy your first home and give more money to seniors for their retirement. We will lower taxes and paper burden for small and medium-sized businesses. We will cut tax on businesses involved in green technology by half to make Canada a true leader in that area and on fighting climate change. We will help Canadians to reduce their energy bills, increase their energy efficiency in their homes, and give them the supports they need following a natural disaster. And today, we are unveiling another important plank of our Liberal plan: more robust measures to protect our land and waters and to encourage more families to get out and experience nature. On October 21st, Canadians will have an important choice to make. Are we going to go back to the inefficient policies of the past, or will we continue to move forward?
Unlike the Conservatives, Liberals won't give tax breaks to the 1% or to big polluters. What we will do is make life more affordable and fight climate change. That's what we're offering, a real plan to move forward for everyone. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Je suis heureux de prendre des questions. Oui, avec
Happy to take your questions.
How can you commit to 25% by 2025 when you don't yet have a plan or mapping that shows which areas you're going to protect?
When we took office in 2015, only 1% of Canada's coastal and ocean areas were protected. We engaged with provinces, with territories, with municipalities, with Indigenous communities, and we went from 1% protection to 14% protection in just 4 years. We know that not only can we protect 25% of our land and 25% of our oceans by 2025, but we must. It is an essential part, not just of protecting biodiversity, not just of fighting climate change, but of also ensuring that future generations have the opportunities that we've had growing up and the economic opportunities that come with biodiversity and better investments in ecotourism and tourism in general. We know that this is the path forward for Canada, and that's why we're going to do it.
Your original promise was to protect 17% of fresh water and land by 2020, and yet you're still at 12%. 5% is a lot to make up. How will you get there by next year?
The original plan was to protect 10% of our coastal areas and oceans, and we are past that at 14% in 4 years. And you're right. The goal was to do that by 2020, so we're 1 year ahead of schedule on protecting our oceans. In regards to land, we are on track to protecting 17% by the end of next year on schedule, because we know that protecting our nature, protecting our land for future generation, protecting our waters in partnership with Indigenous peoples is about fighting climate change, and it's about protecting the future.
We pledged to preserve 10% of our land and oceans by 2020, and we in fact have protected 14% as of this year, 1 year ahead of time. In terms of land protection, we will be protecting 17% of land by the end of next year, as we pledged to do. But we know we have to do more, and that's why we want to protect 25% of our land and 25% of our oceans by 2025. With respect to the candidates, I think you're still missing 4 or 5. Now, what's happening with you? Are you having organization problems? Well, I can tell you we will be running excellent candidates right across the country. We have an excellent candidate with us today. He will continue to serve not only Sudbury but Northern Ontario, and we will be introducing 338 candidates to Canadians for the election on October 21st.
We have a great team of candidates from coast to coast to coast who are focused on choosing forward, focused on investing in Canadians and in our future by supporting the middle class and people working hard to join it. I'm surrounded by great candidates from this area who are going to be continuing to be great voices for Northwestern Ontario. But at the same time, I look forward to presenting 338 extraordinary candidates to Canadians on October 21st.
But how is it that you don't have all your candidates in place at this time? Well, we will have 338 candidates right across this country in order to properly represent our vision of moving forward.
Can you confirm in your conversation with Eva Nassif that you raised your fears of disunity in the Liberal ranks after the fallout of the SNC-Lavalin affair?
I've had many great conversations with all members of our caucus and all of our MPs. I had many good conversations with Madame Nassif, but I respect the choice and the decision made by our independent Green Light Committee that follows the rules laid out by the Liberal Party and assesses whether people are qualified to be candidates for us in this election.
You didn't answer the question. It was whether you raised concerns about disunity, but I want to move on to another story. APTN's investigation says 48 Indigenous children died under your watch in the time it took your government to make necessary changes in funding. What accountability do you hold for that?
We know that there is so much more to do on reconciliation. We know that this is something that Canadians expect and something we have worked on very, very hard over the past 4 years. We've closed the gap on K-12 education in First Nations communities. Now, Indigenous kids get the same level of funding as kids in the provincial system. We've eliminated 87 long-term boil water advisories, and we're on track to lifting all the 50 some odd that remain on time. We're continuing to move forward with investments in healthcare and mental health, in community supports and economic opportunities, in infrastructure and programs for young people. But we know that there are still far too many tragedies ongoing in Indigenous communities, and that's why we must do more. That's why we've committed to doing more. Last night I made an announcement that commits to working with Indigenous communities on guaranteeing quality health care for Indigenous peoples right across the country, moving forward on closing the gap on infrastructure right across the country. We recognize that there is much more to do, and we will keep doing it.
Last night in Thunder Bay, you mentioned Doug Ford by name 5 times, Stephen Harper once, and Andrew Scheer not once. At a certain point, we understand the strategy here, but at a certain point, are you not misleading voters by campaigning against somebody who isn't even on the ballot and has different policies than Mr. Scheer?
Do you know who misled voters? Doug Ford said he was for the people, then turned around and cut services for everyone while cutting taxes for the wealthiest. And Andrew Scheer is putting forward exactly the same vision that Stephen Harper lost on in 2015 because Canadians made a different choice. And Andrew Scheer wants us to double down on the kinds of conservative leadership that we see from the Rocky Mountains to the Bay of Fundy that is fighting against action on climate change. And this week, Canadians and our kids are asking a lot of questions about climate change, having great conversations about how we're going to protect our environment. So I have a question for Andrew Scheer. Will he commit to banning single-use plastics? That's something he hasn't answered yet, and I think Canadians want to hear that.
Tomorrow in Montreal, will you be marching in the climate march? And if so, what message do you take from that?
There has been an extraordinary amount of mobilization by young people and by Canadians across this country and indeed around the world calling for real action on climate change. We have done a lot over the past 4 years. We brought in a price on pollution right across the country. We moved forward on banning single-use plastics, and Andrew Scheer still has to say whether or not he will ban single-use plastics. We're phasing out coal. We're investing in zero-emission vehicles. We're moving forward on protecting more of our nature, including with these ambitious announcements today. So I look forward to marching with thousands of Canadians tomorrow in Montreal, like people are marching right across the country and around the world to fight for the environment. Now, we know that the choice is clear in this election. The Conservatives are running against climate action. They don't think you need to do anything to fight climate change. And not only is that not going to protect our environment, that is not going to protect our kids' future, including their jobs. It is time for Conservatives to understand that the world is demanding climate leadership. We get that, they don't, and we will continue to step up. Okay. Ça fait plusieurs semaines maintenant.
For a number of weeks now, young people and people right across this country and around the world have been demanding action on climate change. They've been marching in the streets to say that real and concrete action is needed now to fight climate change and protect our environment and create economic growth for the future. And yes, I look forward to marching with those young people tomorrow in Montreal. To talk about the things that we've done. We imposed a price on pollution right across the country. We banned single-use plastics, and that's a question that people will have for Andrew Scheer. Will he do the same thing? Will he ban single-use plastics? We also invested in renewable energy, we protected nature, and we will continue to do that. Because I know that there's still a great deal to be done, and the choice for Canadians is very clear between Conservatives who refuse to take action to counter climate change and are not only putting our environment at risk, but our economic future as well.
After the SNC controversy, people talked about how that eroded trust in you and politicians. After the blackface controversy, you said you needed to earn back Canadians' trust. What can you do between now and Election Day concretely that would prove to Canadians that you are someone who is trustworthy?
I'm going to continue to focus on the things that Canadians care most about. Canadians, yes, care about fighting against intolerance and racism, and I will keep standing up against intolerance every single day. But I will also talk about how we're investing in families, investing in the middle class, instead of giving tax breaks to millionaires the way Andrew Scheer keeps proposing. We're going to stand against the cuts that Conservative premiers are making across the country on environmental protections, and we're going to keep fighting them in court to prevent them from making pollution free again. We are going to continue to focus on the future of this country, the way Canadians expect their leaders to. I'm going to continue to fight every day for better opportunities for all Canadians. That's what this election is about, and that's at the heart of the choice people are making.
CBC News. I want to go back to the wording that you've been using this week. You say we're on track to meet the 17% targets of protected land. You're not saying how. You also said we're on track to meet our Paris targets by 2030. Also not saying how, and experts have called that statement misleading. So how do you reconcile that, the misleading targets without details, with your claim that you're showing leadership on climate?
We inherited targets from the Conservatives that they had done absolutely nothing on. And in 4 years, we've reached 3/4 of the way to meeting those targets. Over the next 11 years, Canada will meet and indeed surpass our 2030 targets. But we know we need to do more. And that's why we've put forward concrete initiatives, from cutting taxes in half for innovative companies that create zero-emission technologies, to supporting Canadians with more money up front so they can retrofit their homes, improve their energy efficiency, and save money every single year. Today we're announcing that we're protecting more of our nature and encouraging young people to be, and empowering young people and families to get out and discover it even more so they continue to fight for a better future and a protected environment. And we know that protecting ecosystems and conserving nature is a key element in fighting against climate change. We have continued to move forward in meaningful ways to reduce emissions, and we know there's much more to do. But as I said, in 2015, people said the same thing. How are you going to protect 10% of our oceans and coastlines? There's only 1% protected now. How are you possibly going to do that? Well, not only did we meet that goal in 4 years instead of 5, but we surpassed it to 14%. The way we were able to do it is because we made a commitment to Canadians, and we kept that commitment. And the commitment we make today to protect 25% of our oceans and coastlines and 25% of our land areas by 2025 is not just an ambitious target, it's a necessary target to be able to protect the future of young Canadians.
Hi, Morgan Lowry, Canadian Press. Do you worry that the political dramas happening right now in Washington and in London risk pulling Canadians' attention away from domestic policies and even undermining faith in the democratic process?
I think some of the consequences of the populist tendencies that we've seen over the past few years in places like the UK and the United States are clearly on display for Canadians right now. What we put forward as a plan in 2015 and an approach that we continue with is not exacerbating fears or amplifying concerns and anxieties, but allaying them with a real plan to fight climate change, to make life more affordable for Canadians, to reduce crime by strengthening gun control, when the reality is our opponents want to lower taxes for the wealthiest, want to do nothing to fight climate change, and want to weaken gun control. This is the choice that Canadians are facing. And seeing the consequences of the politics of division and fear elsewhere around the world should both make them proud to be Canadian, where we make different choices, and remind them of the importance of the choice we are making in this election. Do we go back to the politics of division and fear and the politics of the Harper years with Andrew Scheer's plan? Or do we continue to choose forward? I'm for choosing forward. Okay. Nous reconnaissons qu'autour du monde,
we recognize that around the world, in the UK and the United States, we're seeing the consequences of populist politics, exaggeration, division, and fear. And we made a different choice in Canada in recent years. We wanted to reassure Canadians to recognize their anxiety, but at the same time propose real solutions. And in this election, people have a choice to turn back to the politics of division and fear, as we saw under Mr. Harper, or to continue to choose forward, choose a government that will invest more in the middle class and not give tax cuts to the wealthiest, a government that will continue to fight climate change with a realistic and ambitious plan, or conservatives who don't want to take any action on climate change, or a government that will continue to strengthen gun control as opposed to a conservative party that wants to weaken gun control. On all those different issues, Canadians have a very simple choice to make. Do we continue to move forward, or do we go backwards?
Bonjour, Julien du Journal Le Voyageur. Est-ce qu'un gouvernement je vais vous amener sur un autre terrain. Est-ce qu'un gouvernement libéral
Would a Liberal government pledge to quickly change the Official Languages Act, as is being requested by a number of minority associations? For a number of years now, we have been working with the official language, the minority official language communities across the country. And yes, we pledged to review and strengthen the Official Languages Act. I know that this is a priority that everyone is looking to see realized in those communities, and we will be working with them. But we see there again that the choice is clear between a conservative approach, which is to cut services to francophones in Ontario, or a Liberal government that will always defend that linguistic duality that we see reflected in the official language minority communities.
In 2015, you made promises about electoral reform, about balancing the budget, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to say that we saw a lot of sincere efforts in either one of those files. And I just wonder why Canadians should believe you're being sincere this time when you make certain promises.
We made a commitment to grow the economy by investing in Canadians. And that's exactly what we did. We invested in communities, we invested in infrastructure, we invested in the middle class and people working hard to join it, and the results speak for themselves. Canadians created over 1 million new jobs, most of them full-time, over the past 4 years, while at the same time, we were able to lift 900,000 people out of poverty, including 300,000 kids. We've moved forward on some of the most ambitious results ever in protecting our environment by any government in Canadian history, by moving forward on reconciliation in ways that are meaningful, tangible, and are showing results for Indigenous peoples right across the country in true partnership. And we've done so in a way that continues to be fiscally responsible. Our debt as a share of our gross domestic product will continue to decrease every single year under the Liberal plan. But again, if you choose not to take our word for it that we're fiscally responsible, you just need to look at the independent bond and credit rating agencies around the world, like Moody's and S&P, who've granted only 11 countries their top-tier AAA rating for their fiscal sustainability and fiscal responsibility. And our government, and Canada, is one of them. We know that the choice Canadians made in 2015 was the right one. When faced with a choice between Conservatives proposing cuts and austerity as a way of creating growth, or our choice that was investing in communities and in the middle class, Canadians chose investment. And 4 years later, we have tremendous growth and results to show for it. And that's once again the choice that Canadians are facing. The Conservatives are proposing cuts and austerity. We are proposing investment because it's what's working to help Canadians, it's what's working to grow the economy, and it's what's working to build a better future for everyone.
Monsieur Trudeau, Frédéric Pepin pour Radio-Canada. Vous avez parlé d'eau potable dans les réserves autochtones.
You
Vous étiez
talked
à Thunder
about
Bay hier,
drinking water. You
Sudbury
were in
aujourd'hui.
Thunder
Les
Bay
gens
yesterday.
dans les
Today
réserves
you're in
veulent
Sudbury.
entendre
People
quel serait
on
votre
the
plan. Quel est le plan du
reserves
Parti
want to know
libéral
what the
pour
Liberal
régler la
plan is to
situation
resolve
pour l'eau potable, pour l'accès à
the
l'eau potable
issue of
pour les
access to
Pour
clean
l'instant,
drinking
ce sont
water.
des solutions qui ont été
For
mises en
now,
place pièce par pièce.
there's
Est-ce qu'il y
been
a
a
un plan
piecemeal
d'ensemble
approach.
d'agir?
Do you have a
Il y a
comprehensive
4 ans,
solution
on
in
a
mind?
annoncé, il y a 3 ans,
4
on a
years
annoncé
ago, or
notre
3 years
plan
ago, we
pour
announced our
éliminer
plan
les
to
avis
eliminate
d'émission d'eau
boil
sur
water
les réserves
advisories
autochtones à
on
travers le pays.
Indigenous reserves across the country.
3 ans plus tard,
3 years later,
on en a éliminé
we have already
87,
lifted 87
et
of
on
them,
est en voie
and we
d'éliminer
are
les
on track
50
to
autres
eliminate the other
d'ici la
50
prochaine année
between now
et quart,
and the next
parce
year
que,
and a quarter,
c'est exactement ce qu'on
because
avait promis.
that's
D'ici
exactly
le
what we
printemps
promised to
2021.
do
C'est
by
un plan
spring
compréhensif
2021. So it is
qui
a
fait les
comprehensive plan
investissements nécessaires
that
parce qu'on
makes the
reconnaît
necessary
que
investments,
pour
because we
protéger les
realize that in
systèmes
order
d'eau,
to
ça
protect
prend des
water
investissements en
systems, there
infrastructure,
need to
la
be investments
formation,
in
des investissements dans
infrastructure,
les communautés,
training,
et
in
l'éducation.
communities, and
Et
education.
on est en train de faire ces
And we are
investissements-là.
making all of those investments.
Parce que mais ce n'est un exemple.
But this is only one example
du travail
of
qu'on est en train de
the
faire et
work
qu'il
that
nous
we're
reste à
doing
faire
now and that we
en
still
partenariat
have to
avec les
do
peuples
in
autochtones.
partnership with the Indigenous peoples.
We have eliminated 87 long-term boil water advisories in Indigenous communities across this country, and we are very much on track to eliminating the 50 or so that remain before the spring of 2021 deadline. And it's, of course, an important target in and of itself to make sure that everywhere across the country you can drink safe water from your taps. But it's also a commitment that involves investments in education, in training, in infrastructure in Indigenous communities that are so necessary and connected to it. That's why we are pleased that we are on track to lift them all, but we recognize that there is always more work to do with Indigenous peoples on the path to reconciliation and economic opportunity for all. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you all.